Paramahansa Paramajakacharya Ustatara Satasji Srimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Paravareshang Bhagavan Vratani. Shrutani me vyasa mukhadha bhikshnam. Atripnu makshula sukhavahanam. Teshamrite Krishna katamritoghat. Para, higher. Avaresham, of these lower. Bhagavan, O my Lord, O Great One. Vratani, occupations. Shrutani, heard. Me, by me. Vyasa, Vyasa. Mukhat, from the mouth. Abhikshnam, repeatedly. Atripnuma, I am satisfied. Shula, little. Sukha avahanam, that which causes happiness. Tesham, out of that. Rite, without. Krishna Katha, talks about the personality of Godhead, Lord Krishna. Amrita Oghat, from the nectar. Translation: O my Lord, I have repeatedly heard about these higher and lower statuses of human society from the mouth of Vyasadeva, and I am quite satiated with all these lesser subject matters and their happiness. They have not satisfied me with the nectar of topics about Krishna. Please repeat, O my Lord, I have repeatedly heard about these higher and lower statuses of human society from the mouth of Vyasadeva, and I am quite satiated with all these lesser subject matters and their happiness. They have not satisfied me with the nectar of topics about Krishna. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Because people are very much interested in hearing social and historical presentations, Srila Vyasadeva has compiled many books, such as Puranas and Mahabharata. These books are reading matter for the mass of people, and they were compiled with a view to reviving their God consciousness, now forgotten in the conditional life of material existence. The real purpose of such literatures is not so much to present topics of historical references, but to revive the people's sense of God consciousness. For example, Mahabharata is the history of the Battle of Kurukshetra, and common people read it because it is full of topics regarding the social, political, and economic problems of human society. But factually, the most important part of Mahabharata is Bhagavad Gita, which is automatically taught to readers along with the historical narrations of the Battle of Kurukshetra. Vidura explained to Maitreya his position of being fully satiated with the knowledge of mundane social and political topics and having no more interest in them. He was anxious to hear transcendental topics regarding Lord Sri Krishna. Because there were insufficient topics directly concerning Krishna in the Puranas, Mahabharata, etc., he was not satisfied and wanted to know more about Krishna. Krishna Katha, or topics regarding Krishna, are transcendental, and there is no satiation in hearing such topics. Bhagavad Gita is important on account of its being Krishna Katha, or speeches delivered by Lord Krishna. The story of the battle of Kurukshetra may be interesting for the mass of people, but to a person like Vidura, who is highly advanced in devotional service, only Krishna Katha and that which is dovetailed with Krishna Katha is interesting. Vidura wanted to hear everything from Maitreya, and so he inquired from him, but he desired that all the topics be in relationship with Krishna. As fire is never satisfied in its consumption of firewood, so a pure devotee of the Lord never hears enough about Krishna. Historical events and other narrations concerning social and political incidents all become transcendental as soon as they are in relationship with Krishna. That is the way to transform mundane things into spiritual identity. The whole world can be transformed into Vaikuntha if all worldly activities are dovetailed with Krishna Katha. There are two important Krishna Kathas current in the world, Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. Bhagavad Gita is Krishna Katha because it is spoken by Krishna, whereas Srimad Bhagavatam is Krishna Katha because it narrates about Krishna. Lord Chaitanya advised all his disciples to preach Krishna Katha all over the world without discrimination, because the transcendental value of Krishna Katha can purify one and all from material contamination. Om Jnana Timirandasa Jnanandjana Shalakaya Chakshu Enmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. So the Vedas, we know, are meant to elevate people, meant to take them up to a higher situation in their consciousness. And they are meant for the mass of people to study, to read, to get absorbed in. And from the Vedas, piety increases. The mode of goodness also comes. If you study the Vedas, then you're going to be, your lower modes are going to be subjugated. And mostly when we study the Puranas, the topics there are that they include discussions of the demigods and the rishis, the great saints, and plus there's philosophy intertwined. And in the Mahabharata, there's this history of this huge battle, of course, 5,000 years ago. So it's interesting for people to read about it. It's very fascinating. People all over the world are sort of captivated by the Ramayana, Mahabharata, because they're so interesting. But most people are moving slowly in their consciousness is moving slowly. They are not looking, most people, when they look to the Vedas, they're not looking for epiphanies. They're not looking to change the paradigms of their lives. But they're looking because it's interesting and it captivates their attention. So these topics that I've been mentioning, the reasons for the Vedas, they're all superficial reasons. And the actual real purpose is to revive the living entity's relationship with Krishna. We know that we're all spiritual living entities and that our relationship with Krishna is paramount. Nothing else matters. We understand that. And that's the purpose of the Vedas, actually. That's the real purpose. So here we have Vidura. So Vidura was very well educated and he'd been schooled in politics. He'd grown up, in the house of Dhritarashtra and Duryodhana, all the things that had gone on. He'd witnessed everything. So, and he'd witnessed the whole battle of Kurukshetra. But for him, there was no rasa or taste or juice there. It was like dry politics. It didn't excite the heart. So here he's actually saying that I've heard all these topics and I'm satiated. He's not satiated with ecstasy. He's had enough. So he wants to know more about Krishna? That's what he's asking to Maitreya. So he knew where to seek satisfaction for the heart. Because really, we're all looking for our hearts to feel satisfied. But it's just unfortunate that the way the material world's laid out, we look for it in our family, we look for it in, people worship movie stars and sports people, and there's so many sort of distractions for people to think that their heart can be satisfied. But unfortunately, it doesn't work out, as Vidura knew. Such an elevated family he's from, but he wasn't interested anymore. So once one's Krishna consciousness awakens, what happens is all these other topics, their grasp on the heart and on your consciousness diminishes. And the more we're attached to hearing about Krishna and chanting and, like the whole bhakti process, the more the attraction for all these other things is going to keep dwindling. Because we want that attraction for the material world to go right down to nil. And we want our attraction to Krishna to be everything. That's what Srila Prabhupada has given us, the opportunity to reach those heights. This is this process of bhakti where we can be completely absorbed in Krishna and have no attraction to the material world. So, for example, when we would hear Krishna Katha from Srila Prabhupada, apart from the fact that everyone was pretty sleep deprived, and often you see you look back at the classes and you see some people that are like dive bombing, but they were so wonderful that you didn't want the class to finish, or you didn't want the darshan to be over, because you felt, and everybody felt in that room, that you were completely transferred to the spiritual world by Srila Prabhupada's purity and hearing him speak about Krishna. You immediately felt you were in the spiritual world. You didn't feel that connection to the material world until you walked out, and then it sort of all descended again. But we've had that experience of that total blissful absorption in Krishna Katha from a saintly person. So, as it's stated here, that there are two main sources of Krishna Katha. Bhagavad Gita, Krishna himself speaks the Bhagavad Gita, and Srimad Bhagavatam is spoken all about Krishna. It's various histories of great devotees and the Lord himself taken together, Srimad Bhagavatam, and it's pure Krishna. I've got some wonderful quotes about the potency of Srimad Bhagavatam. So, if we actually become saturated with ecstatic feelings, then we will be completely absorbed with no break in Krishna Katha. But because we've got material bodies and we're not so attracted to Krishna Katha that we're just drinking that nectar and don't want anything, then we just get fidgety and we're thinking about prasadam and, But actually, if one is completely absorbed, then there'll be no other attraction. And we saw that in Srila Prabhupada. He had no attraction for anything but Krishna, and it was palpable. Everyone who met Srila Prabhupada, who even saw him, they were like stunned, because he was a Vaikuntha man, and his whole, everything about Srila Prabhupada was Krishnized. And that's an extraordinary thing to see for a mundane person, to see a totally Krishnized soul. And that is what we experienced with Srila Prabhupada. So I wanted to read a little bit. There's some verses in Bhagavad Gita that talk about this attraction for hearing about Krishna. So this is verse 9 of chapter 10. And this is that famous verse that ends Tushanti cha ramanti cha. The thoughts of my pure devotees dwell in me, their lives are surrendered to me, and they derive great satisfaction and bliss, enlightening one another and conversing about me. Prabhupada says in the purport, devotees of the Supreme Lord are 24 hours daily engaged in glorifying the pastimes of the Supreme Lord. Their hearts and souls are constantly submerged in Krishna, and they take pleasure in discussing him with other devotees. Because it's such a sweet thing to sit down and talk about Krishna. You just immediately feel enlivened. And at the end of the purport it states, the Srimad Bhagavatam is also full of narration about the relationship between the Supreme Lord and his devotee. Therefore the Srimad Bhagavatam is very dear to the devotees. In this narration there is nothing about material activities, sense gratification or liberation. Srimad Bhagavatam is the only narration in which the transcendental nature of the Supreme Lord and his devotees is fully described. So this is what Vidura is after. Thus the realized souls in Krishna consciousness take continual pleasure in hearing such transcendental literatures. So Vidura was thirsting for this because he'd had a taste. He knew Krishna and he loved Krishna. And so all the other things were like, not important, not interesting for him, not satisfying to the soul. He just wanted to Maitreya to speak about Krishna. And then in 10:19, there's a purport which says, it is not possible to comprehend the greatness of Krishna and his opulences. Because even if you talk all day about Krishna, even if you study all the scriptures, you cannot know Krishna because his greatness is constantly expanding anyway, and because we're a jiva, so how can we take in everything about the Supreme Personality of Godhead? So Prabhupada says, the senses of the individual soul are imperfect and do not permit him to understand the totality of Krishna's affairs. Still, the devotees try to understand Krishna, but not on the principle that they will be able to understand Krishna fully at any specific time or in any state of life. Rather, the very topics of Krishna are so relishable that they appear to them as nectar, thus they enjoy them. So we can't know Krishna, we can never know Krishna, but the more we try to know Krishna, the more Krishna reveals himself through the scripture, through Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita. And this is from chapter 15, text 6, the purport. In his conditioned life, the living entity considers himself to be lord of the material world, but in his liberated state, he enters into the spiritual kingdom and becomes the associate of the Supreme Lord. There he enjoys eternal bliss, eternal life, and full knowledge. And then the next sentence is, one should be captivated by this information. One's heart should be captivated by this information about the spiritual world. He should desire to transfer himself to that eternal world and extricate himself from this false reflection of reality. So somehow or another our hearts have to become captivated by Krishna Katha. And then we can go to Krishna's world. So our whole business is to clean the heart, Chetodarpana. And this is what nicer way to clean the heart than to hear about Krishna, topics about Krishna. Because there's like so many effects of hearing Krishna Katha. But principally, the heart becomes cleansed and becomes attracted to Krishna. That's the main effect of hearing Krishna Katha. That the heart, and that's what we want, because we can approach Krishna with a dirty heart, and we have to, because our hearts are dirty. But we're praying for that heart to become worthy for Krishna to reveal himself in. And the way the heart becomes worthy is we fill it up with Krishna. It's like the ink You can't, like if you've got a glass of milk, there's no ink going to fill in there. But if it's only half a glass, you can fill it up with ink and it all becomes black. So if our heart is full with Krishna by our chanting and our hearing and our talking with each other about Krishna, then there's no scope for material energy to, crash us back down again. Once we have that attraction. So I always like the fact that the word heart has the word ear in it. So it's kind of like the way to your heart is through your ear, through oral reception. So another effect of hearing Krishna Katha is that we know this Srimad Bhagavatam was spoken to Maharaj Pariksit. He had 7 days and he just heard constantly Krishna Katha. And what was the effect? That fear of death evaporated. So when that snake bird came, he was totally absorbed in Krishna. There was no fear. So there are so many side effects, beautiful side effects from hearing Krishna Katha. And that is one of them, fearlessness. And we saw, I don't know where this was it in LA? I think there was an earthquake once. And even the devotees were like screaming and running. And Prabhupada was just there sitting, completely unafraid. And then he was commenting. But I mean, it is a natural thing to try to save the body. But so if we hear nicely, like with open heart, if we hear Krishna Katha, then that fear of death is removed. So, Prabhupada used to talk about how we're trying to transform everything by putting Krishna first. So he often gave the example that if you have a whole bunch of zeros, it's worth nothing. But if you put a 1 in front of it, suddenly it becomes 1 million or 100 million. So that 1 is Krishna. So if we can put Krishna first in our lives, then everything else in our lives, the value becomes so much more strong. And the way we put Krishna in our lives is through this Krishna Katha, hearing and speaking about him. So Prabhupada is saying here that if the whole world, if Krishna Katha is the only remedy for all people of the world, and so if the whole world starts to listen to Krishna, just imagine if everybody, all the leaders got up and they plugged into the Prabhupada box and listened to a Prabhupada lecture, and everything would be so different. Everything would be like transformed. And he said that in Melbourne, at the Melbourne temple. He said, don't think this place is ordinary. This place is this temple is Vaikuntha, because all the activities here take place in Vaikuntha. In Vaikuntha, everybody's hearing and chanting and wanting to serve and wanting to love the Lord, and they're loving the Lord. And here, also in our temples, Prabhupada was saying, it's also Vaikuntha, because we are doing the same business. So it's not like everything changes when we go to the spiritual world, because what are we doing here? We're serving Krishna and trying to love Krishna. So when we transform to the spiritual world, we're serving Krishna and loving Krishna. So the trick is to make our activities here as conscious as possible, so that we're not doing things automatically en route. So, so I was going to read some nice Srimad Bhagavatam quotes, also about Krishna Katha and hearing Krishna Katha. Because Srimad Bhagavatam, of course, is full of Krishna Katha, but there are some nice verses that talk about it. So in Canto 2, Chapter 2, Verse 37. I won't read the Sanskrit, but it's quite famous. Pibati ye bhagavata atmana satam. Those who drink through oral reception oral reception, drinking, just imagine, their ears fully filled with the nectarian message of Lord Krishna, the beloved of the devotees, purify themselves of the polluted aim of life known as material enjoyment, and thus go back to Godhead, back to the Lord's lotus feet. So this is the result of proper hearing, proper oral reception. We go back to Krishna's lotus feet. And next one is Canto 3, 15:25. Persons whose bodily features change in ecstasy and who breathe heavily and perspire due to hearing the glories of the Lord are promoted to the kingdom of God, even though they do not care for meditation and other austerities. So if we can get to that point, then we'll be promoted. And there's another one here. 3:25:25. In the association of pure devotees, discussion of the potent pastimes and activities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is very pleasing and satisfying to the ear and heart. By cultivating such knowledge, one gradually becomes advanced on the path of liberation. Thereafter, one is freed and one's attraction becomes fixed. Then real devotional service and devotional service begin. So we're performing devotional service, but it's like there's a veil there. It's like a little shadow devotional service. And as the heart becomes cleansed, that shadow is removed. And, at some point, pure devotional service takes place. And there's one more, Srimad Bhagavatam 11, Canto 11, Chapter 3, 30 and 31. And it says, one should learn how to associate with the devotees of the Lord by gathering with them to chant the glories of the Lord. This process is most purifying. As devotees thus develop their loving friendship, they feel mutual happiness and satisfaction, and by thus encouraging one another, they are able to give up material sense gratification, which is the cause of all suffering. The devotees of the Lord constantly discuss the glories of the personality of Godhead amongst themselves. Thus they constantly remember the Lord and remind one another of his qualities and pastimes. In this way, by their devotion to the principles of Bhakti Yoga, the devotees please the personality of Godhead, who takes away from them everything inauspicious. Being purified of all impediments, the devotees awaken to pure love of God, and thus even within this world their spiritualized bodies exhibit symptoms of transcendental ecstasy. So here we're being encouraged to remind each other, to talk about Krishna and remind each other. So we know that in the Nectar of Instruction, in the 4th verse, that revealing one's mind in confidence and inquiring confidentially are the 6 processes are given, which are of utmost importance for the devotees. Taking prasad, receiving prasad, giving gifts, receiving gifts, and this process of inquiring confidentially and revealing one's mind. So sometimes it happens that we don't understand everything that we may be reading, and there's no shame in that. But we can make a note and we can talk to people about it, and sometimes, like myself and Rasarani, we have a Bhagavatam buddy system where we share Srimad Bhagavatam verse every day, one verse. And so many times in the purport we were like, how did you understand this? I understood it like that. And then sometimes we think, we're going to have to ask someone senior about that one. So that's fine, but still you're churning the nectar, and you're studying and encouraging each other. And Krishna then, it's stated that is pleasing to Krishna. So he then purifies the heart. It's such a simple little it's kind of like a secret. You exchange talks about Krishna, and there is Krishna purifying your heart while it's happening. It's not a secret, it's an open secret. But sometimes we forget, the importance of just talking about Krishna. And there's so many ways. We can ask people, what are you reading? Or we can gather something that we read that's really far out, and we can talk to devotees about it, because we feel enlivened, and then they'll feel enlivened, and we'll feel more enlivened that we've shared it. What do they say? Sharing is caring. My little granddaughter, when she goes up to the other little one, she might grab a toy away and she'll say, sharing is caring. But if we share Krishna, that's real caring. That's like heart caring. And it's our process. It's our process. So I wanted to talk about one more thing. One more, just read a little bit from Srimad Bhagavatam 1.3.40. And the purport, Prabhupada says, one can derive from Srimad Bhagavatam study Srimad Bhagavatam, all benefits that are possible from the personal presence of the Lord. It carries with it all the transcendental blessings of Lord Sri Krishna that we can expect from his personal presence. So that's pretty amazing. If we study Srimad Bhagavatam and we had Krishna standing there right with us, it would be equal. The benefits from seeing Sri Krishna, although we'd be fainting, and would be the same as Srimad Bhagavatam, the benefits from Srimad Bhagavatam, studying Srimad Bhagavatam. So, Vidura is just very blunt here. I've had enough. He's heard all these other topics. He just wants to talk about Krishna. And the more we just want to talk about Krishna, the more our heart will become clean and pure, and all those impurities get washed away. Because if you have something that you're so absorbed in, then other things are just, they're going to be not important. Our future is determined by what we're doing now, and so if we're very determined to, taste the nectar and get involved and talk about Krishna, then our future is going to be even more so. Krishna will place us in a situation where we're just hearing Krishna Katha constantly. And maybe if we're so purely intense about this desire, then he'll place us back at his lotus feet in the spiritual world. So it's no small thing to talk about Krishna, to enliven each other. That's what devotees do. That's what they love to do. So the more we can do that, the better. So, today is Jayadev Goswami's disappearance. So he came 300 years before Lord Chaitanya, and he was a court pundit. The king was Sri Lakshman Sen, and he was king of Bengal. So he and his wife Padmavati were like single-pointed, focused devotees. They worshipped Krishna like anything. And later, after he gave up royal life, he went to Champahati near Navadvip, near Mayapur, beautiful there, and he just concentrated on writing, and he wrote a scripture called Gita Govinda, which was so beautiful that Lord Chaitanya used to become ecstatic by hearing it. When Swarup Damodar or Ramananda Roy would sing verses written by Jayadev Goswami, Chandridas Vidyapati, he would just become ecstatic. So Jayadev Goswami wrote many songs. One of them we sing every day. Anybody know what it is? Yes. Namaste Narasingaya. Tavakara Kamala. He wrote those glorification of those Das avatars. And he wrote Shrita Kamala. Shrita Kamala Kuchamandana. That's him. And he wrote another one that we sing sometimes, He Govinda, He Govinda, Keshava Madhava, Dina Daya. That's him also. So he wrote songs and he wrote this Gita Govinda. Now this Gita Govinda is very high pastimes of Radha and Krishna. Not for us, not for our, we're not ready, but for Lord Chaitanya, he would relish these. With his very intimate devotees, he would relish these pastimes, become completely ecstatic by hearing Jayadev's katha. So one has to be extremely qualified and pious. Even he says that in the beginning. You have to have reached a high level of piety to serve. He says that the Gita Govinda scripture may be worshipped and served by those who are extremely qualified in devotional piety. But he's important because he comes on our Vaishnav calendar because of those beautiful bhajans and because of the fact that Lord Chaitanya just relished so much hearing from him. So, I just wanted to finish off remembering how in Vrindavan, when the cowherd boys would come home from being with Krishna in the forest, and some wonderful pastime has taken place, he may have killed a demon, and they would come home and they'd say, Mother, Krishna is so wonderful. This happened today. He killed this demon. Or, they would tell about the pastimes, and the mother would say, yes, Krishna is a very wonderful boy. So, in Vrindavan, that's what they do. They talk about how wonderful Krishna is. And that's what they do in the whole Vaikunthas, Goloka Vrindavan. They talk about how wonderful Krishna is. So if we start talking about how wonderful Krishna is, then we forget about how horrible these bodies are and how miserable the material world is. So it's a heart-filling activity to speak Krishna Katha. And we can thank Vidura for this nice verse about how important Krishna Katha is. So thank you very much for listening. Please forgive me if I've made mistakes. Does anybody have any comments or questions? Yeah?
I'm just wondering, can you tell us more about the pastimes of Jayadeva Goswami, particularly Chantahati?
Well, I can tell you one pastime of Jayadeva Goswami. I don't know, there's not much written, but one time, but this was when he was with his wife. I don't know if she went to the Champahati with him, maybe. But he was, yes, it would have been, with his wife was with him, and then later he took sannyas. So he was writing about the pastimes of the gopis and Krishna, and then he wanted to write. He wanted to write the words Dehi Pada Pallava Mudaram, that Krishna bows down his head at the lotus feet of Radharani. And then he thought, I can't write that. Why is this coming into my heart? And then he thought, well, I'm going to take bath in the Ganga. So he went to the Ganga and he took bath. And his wife was cooking the offering for Krishna. In the meantime, when his wife was cooking, suddenly Jayadeva Goswami, but it wasn't actually Jayadeva Goswami, Krishna, in the form of Jayadeva Goswami, came into the house. And he went over to the parchment and he wrote these words, Dehi Pada, Dehi is Radharani, Pada, feet, Pallava Mudaram, Krishna bows down at the feet of Radharani. He wrote that. And then he went and he sat down, he took prasadam. And then he walked out of the house and disappeared. At the same second, Jayadeva walked in and asked about his prasadam. And she said, you just had prasadam. And she told the story and he was like, oh! And he ran to the parchment and he saw on the parchment it was still wet. These two lines where the Lord had written that was still wet ink. So he said, oh, She said, "You are the most fortunate because Krishna has eaten. Krishna came and ate your prasadam, and Krishna's written this in this book." That's all I can. Okay, thank you very much. Hare Krishna Jai. Srimad Bhagavatam ki Jai.